Is there really people out here still saying that the Bible ain't real, that Jesus never existed? Listen, we're going to get into all of that in this video. My name is Flav, and this is Flav Uncut. Let's get straight to this video.
If it don't match scripture, we gon' bring it up. Hit subscribe one time. This is Flav Uncut.
Okay, like I said, we're going to be reacting to a video today. We're going to be talking about an ex-Christian. He's an ex-preacher. These extra preachers always get me. But yeah, without no further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
But it always amazed me that you have all these different groups like Pentecostal, AME, Kojic, Baptist, Traditional Baptist, Nazarene, Lutheran, Calvin, all are reading the same book but different interpretations, right? And they spread off, and this group goes here, this group goes there, and different theologies, different doctrines, and different beliefs. And I'm like,
so my only problem with this topic about denominations, I'll just say very clearly, my first problem is that just because it's a different denomination does not mean that it's 30,000. Like I think he said it's like 30, anywhere from 30 to 45,000 different denominations, and that's not 30 to 45,000 different gospels. A lot of times they'll have different denominations in churches. Let's say it's the same church but in a different country. They'll call it something different. It could be language based. So if a church is in a different language, or they don't speak, the same language, they'll call that a different denomination. These are all can be counted separately, which for me, that doesn't necessarily dispute the idea of, God allowing all of these different denominations. And I should have a picture or something popping up, just kind of explaining this to you. I always want to give y'all information for y'all to screenshot this and, use it for your own type of facts. So, different denominations it's all about like administrative stuff, right? So obviously it could be different things. It could be stuff like churches around the world. It could be culture or language. Women gotta wear dresses, men has to wear a suit. Like any small thing made it have a disagreement. And actually even if we grant him this idea that there's different denominations and it's different gospels, Paul actually predicted that into the Bible. So we can actually get into that real quick. So this is Paul speaking in Acts chapter 20, verses 29 through 30. I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you and won't spare the flock. Some of your own people will distort the word in order to lure followers after them. So, that's Paul saying that, even if we go with his argument of saying that all of these different denominations is a different gospel, which these denominations aren't, even if we go with what he's saying, Paul still warns us about that in the Bible. So to say that something in the Bible actually was fulfilled, and for us to actually watch out for these things, to use that and say that that's a knock against the Bible and I guess its validity or, it being authentic, that just doesn't make sense. So, yeah.
like I should be able to find throughout history that this stuff happened. So I'm gonna go fact check it. I'm gonna go look in the history books to see, and I'm gonna see what archaeology say. I'm gonna see what real historians say. I'm gonna see all of it. I want to see if it really happened. So man, as I studied and I just kept studying, I'm like, bruh, there was no worldwide flood. Like, bro, no, it wasn't. That never happened. Not the way the Bible talking about.
The Bible is not just a history book. Yes, it's a history book. It's a poetry book. There's like, they speak in poems. Jesus speaks in parables. There's prophecies in this book. There's letters. It's a biography. Like, it's so many different things. So, and part of what he said in the beginning of this video was talking about how, he asked questions and people wouldn't answer his questions. And I think this is a really, really big, important part, because not being able to ask questions means you're going to run with your own narrative. And if my narrative is that if I can't tangibly see evidence, then it didn't happen, I would ask him and people like him, in order for you to believe this, what type of evidence would you have to see in order for those things to be true?
There was no exodus from Egypt with all these people in the desert and wandering for 40 years. Or I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, archaeology, y'all ain't finding bones, y'all ain't finding nothing in nothing excavating, and they over there now and been doing it for years and published work about excavating it, looking up this place in Israel, looking up that place in Israel, nobody finding nothing. I'm like, so I'm like, okay, well, Adam and Eve, right? They the first two people that birthed the whole humanity.
I would strongly encourage you guys to go watch the full length of these videos because it's very, very important. I'm just going to show parts of it just to show you that, okay, it might not necessarily be proven that, you know, there was a Noah's Ark, but there is different things in these videos to prove that there was some type of flood. A lot of times in ancient language, the whole earth, when it's saying things like the whole earth, it usually means things like the world as they knew it. So like a regional flood could still be described as total or as whole from their perspective, because that's all they could see, right? And you know, it says things like it covered mountains. It didn't necessarily say it covers all mountains in the world. You know, can I necessarily prove like a lab experiment that, you know, the Noah's Ark and the flood actually happened? No. But ancient history never really works like that. But I can at least, you know, help to show that there's some type of reasonable evidence to where you can't necessarily just dismiss it as pure fiction.
Thus, we do have evidence that correlates with the biblical account. Long ago, a great flood reshaped the entire region and cut off humans from the Gulf Oasis, known later to the Hebrews as the Land of Eden. However, could there have been global flooding? In other words, as the Persian Gulf flooded, could there have been massive floods along coastal regions in a global sense? The idea is not inconceivable. Numerous oral traditions do in fact support this notion. Several cultures from around the world report they experience a sudden and catastrophic.
If you do a little bit more research, you will find out that there isn't enough evidence to say that it never happened, that it's just a completely made up story. And that's what I disagree with. I'm not necessarily arguing with the fact that you just don't 100% believe it, but to say that you completely dismiss it and you look at it as something that never happened, you don't have enough lack of evidence to get to that conclusion.
Flood in the distant past. One study on Aboriginal oral traditions argues that corroborating evidence indicates Australia experienced catastrophic flooding that affected the coastal regions of the continent. Correlating with the same time as this prehistoric Mesopotamian flood, big changes were happening to Earth's climate. This is known as the Younger Dryas period. About 12,800 years ago, the last ice age came to a sudden and abrupt end, and recent studies have suggested evidence of a comet impact, which could have been the likely cause. The sudden melting of ice would have caused sea levels to rise rapidly, and this correlates with 75% of the megafauna disappearing, as well as the end of the Clovis culture in North America. But some researchers have suggested the beginning of the Younger Dryas period was not a sudden and catastrophic change, as previously thought. However, at the end of this period, the Earth's temperature rapidly increased. One study said the Younger Dryas period ended extremely fast, causing a second rapid increase in sea level. 10 million square miles of land were lost, and the global climate transitioned to a warming period. What caused this is still disputed, but this would have caused catastrophic global flooding events. And due to the climate warming, it likely would have caused massive rainstorms around the world. Correlating with the research with regards to the deluge in the Gulf Oasis. So it is likely there were several global flooding events, just never a point where every piece of land was completely underwater. Also,
Right. So again, all of this information is literally articles and things that people studying, getting all of these facts together of different times, different periods, and putting all of their information together to see if this was actually a real thing. So again, no, this particular part is not proving that Noah per se existed, but we can see that there is more than enough evidence to say that you cannot just deem this as a myth.
So it is plausible the ark came to rest in Urartu. And this is also an odd choice to place the ark. If they were inventing a myth, it would make more sense to pick a mountain significant to Israel, like Sinai or Mount Zion, for theological messaging. Instead, they pick an out-of-place mountain region that has nothing to do with Israel and has no theological significance. Supporting the idea, they were reporting what historically happened, instead of inventing a legend. Walton and Longman say, it is significant to note that if the biblical account were simply adopting a Mesopotamian one, we might expect Genesis to refer to the same mountain. If someone were to suggest that the biblical author was borrowing but changed the mountain to associate the text more specifically with Israel, certainly the mountains of Ararat would make no sense. This therefore stands as an important distinction, because this is not a matter of different interpretations by different cultures. This is a specific detail.
Right, so that is just simply explaining that the point of us making up a myth, the point of us making up legends and lies, is to benefit us, to make us seem more powerful, more superior. You want to gain something, right? In order to get people to believe a lie, you want to gain money, power, just respect, whatever. You want to gain something. So by the simple fact of where it landed or where it resolved at, it's a mountain that has nothing to do with anything important. Mantling the motive, right? The motive behind the myth. If it was a myth, then you would see the lies would line up more towards things that would make them look better, or that would make them look more spiritual or more respected, to say this is holy ground because the ship landed here or resolved. So it's like that, yeah, it kind of kills that entire argument.
Now, it is impossible to deny that the biblical flood account does have parallels found in other Mesopotamian flood legends. But Walton and Longman note we cannot just focus on the similarities, as there are also numerous differences as well that distinguish the flood account as an independent tradition, instead of it just being a copy of the Mesopotamian legends. Plus, the various Mesopotamian accounts have differences between them as well, and things unique to each account. They are all not just copies of the same legend. So given the external evidence we went over, it is possible all the flood accounts are echoing back to a real historical event that happened, instead of just copying an original myth. As Walton and Longman say, the reader should not jump to the conclusion that the identification of similarities suggests that the biblical author has borrowed information directly from the Mesopotamian accounts. Everyone in the ancient world knows there was a flood, just like everyone today knows there was a Holocaust. It is a cultural river. Mesopotamian accounts are drawing out of the cultural river and spinning it according to their cultural ideas and theology. The biblical authors are doing the same. We need not concern ourselves with whether the Israelite authors have access to copies of the Mesopotamian accounts.
So, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better. To question these things with all of the evidence given as it and playing it as it's pure fiction or it's just a complete myth. At that point, I would have to ask you, what type of evidence would you need for something that happened that long ago? And a lot of people like that would not be able to give an answer. So
right here where this valley comes out, there's a natural waterway. It's a dry riverbed that is called a wadi, W-A-D-I. If you went into that wadi, you would find there are rocks all over the place, but they've all been pushed out of the way to make a path. Somebody pushed all the rocks out of the way to make a path for wagons, apparently. That dry riverbed, the wadi, ends up at that white dot, which you can barely see from this satellite map. That white dot is actually this giant beach. Off to the right, you can see where that wadi comes into it, that dry riverbed. And at the bottom of that beach, way down there, which would be the south end, at the south end, Ron Wyatt found this pillar. It had fallen down, half in the water. He and his sons dragged it out, scrubbed it off. A lot of it was eroded, but part of it was still readable. And it basically said something to the effect of, this pillar was erected by King Solomon to commemorate the crossing of the Red Sea. So they went and did some research. The National Geophysical Data Center in Boulder, Colorado has a map showing the depth of the water. How deep is the water? Above this red arrow, you can see where it says the Elan Deep, or Elat Deep. It's nearly 5,000 feet deep. The Gulf of Aqaba is. Incredibly deep water. South of there is the Aragonese Deep, which again is nearly 5,000 feet deep. But right where that arrow is, there's a shallow place. It's only 900 feet deep, which is still pretty deep. But 900 foot in 8 or 9 miles is a nice gentle slope down and a nice gentle slope up. Easy for wagons. There's an underwater land bridge right there. He says they walked across on dry ground, 900-foot wall of water on both sides. He went out to as deep as they could go, 100 feet or whatever, 150 feet with the scuba equipment, and found all along, as far as they could go, chariot wheels with no chariots attached to them. And chariot bodies crumbling badly, poorly conditioned, with no wheels on them. They found horse skeletons and human skeletons crusted over with coral. The chariot wheels, you can see one here in this picture, it's kind of hard to see, but it's gold-plated wood, but the wood has rotted out. There's only one Egyptian dynasty that used 4-spoke, 6-spoke, and 8-spoke, all 3 types used in this one dynasty. And all 3 are found down there, or something like that. If you look at the far right, this arrow is pointing to a mountain in Saudi Arabia called Jabal al-Laws, which means Mountain of Laws. It's been labeled that for centuries. Could Mount Sinai be in Arabia? Well, let's see what the Bible says. Galatians chapter 4. Which gendereth the bondage which is Agar, for this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. Hello, it's been there all along, folks. Okay. Why have they been looking in the Sinai Peninsula? That's not where it is. This is a picture of the mountain that apparently is Mount Sinai. The top of it is still black.
Yeah, so even if we're getting into the topic of Exodus, I mean, there's evidence right there, right? Again, it's not a matter of whether you believe it or not. His claim was there is 0 evidence. If there's 0 evidence, then what do we call what we just seen? So I think when you build up all of these cases against the Bible and you have something that you already want to believe, you built up in your mind all of these things that you need to see in order for it to be true. So then you negate or you ignore what's already been proven, or what is the closest form of evidence that we can have to lead towards this direction. But sometimes you've already made it up in your mind that what you're gonna see is not gonna be enough. And if that's the case, then you're at a really, really tough spot, because you need God himself to come down and say, hey, I'm real, I did this. Let me show you how it happened. Like, I don't know what else he needs.
How are you doing all this stuff? The greatest story ever told, and nobody's writing about you. Nowhere. We don't have records of none of this stuff. And the thing about it is, the stuff that is written about him is written after the fact. Josephus, which scholars, they've already talked about how his writings was a forgery. Tacitus gave a line about Christians.
We're going to address everything that he's talking about, but let's just start with the Josephus part. So he labeled basically Josephus as forged because he wasn't trusted. So he had 2 references towards Jesus. The direct reference towards Jesus, they claim that have been contaminated. Okay, cool. They threw that out. But the James reference, who was Jesus' brother, it's widely treated as authentic. So for him to even make this claim that, Josephus was unreliable, I've never heard that. I've never heard nobody ever say, even in the research that I've done, I've never heard nobody ever say that Josephus was completely unreliable. They said there was a section, but because of that section, that doesn't mean that the entire thing was messed up. So even Josephus' writings was considered to be authentic, besides, just a couple points.
It was a forgery. Tacitus gave a line about Christians, but it wasn't talking about a Bible Jesus. It was talking about a group of people, and that was years later, after the fact. So then I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Slow.
Even if Tacitus heard from Christians, then it would prove that Jesus' execution claim wasn't a myth. Because people are actually saying it happened. It wasn't oh, well, we heard this happen. It's like, no, people are claiming that they seen Jesus get executed. So it was already public knowledge at the time that was attached to Pilate in the early days of Rome. So even with the outsiders looking in, they're looking into this situation and they're like, okay, well, that's the rumor that's going around. But he didn't get this information from Christians because he despised them. So then we would say, where did he get this information from? He had to have heard it. These are things that was going around and things that they, that they knew from where he was from. So it's not even like, people are saying, oh, these things happen or maybe this happened. It's like, no, it was a well-known thing that Jesus was executed under Pontius Pilate. Not necessarily the part of him being resurrected, because that wasn't spoken about, but he did speak about Jesus, throughout, his writings. So scholars, they consider Tacitus to be genuine. People that took the time to look through these things thoroughly, who is Christians and non-Christians, deemed him as credible. And I forgot to mention Tacitus was Latin, so he spoke about how someone claimed to be Christus or Christos, or however you say it. So he's literally saying someone claimed to be Christ. Who else in the early days claimed to be Christ? Tacitus literally says there is someone in this area that claimed to be Christ that was executed under Pontius Pilate. So even what he's saying, it wasn't talking about a Bible Jesus. That's absolutely false.
But I don't have an issue with being a historical Jesus. Like, was there a guy? Yeah, there probably was a guy. I don't have an issue with that. But to say that the guy from the Bible perspective was born from a 12-year-old. He walked on water. He fed thousands with, I think it's 2 fish, 5 loaves of bread. Raised Lazarus from the dead. To say that that's the guy? No. That guy is 100% mythology.
Okay, so we are going to get into this whole Jesus talk, right? Let me pull up scripture. All right, so let's get into the Bible. And the reason why I want to pull this out is because we will see the authentication of what he said in his argument. We're going to see, does his argument make sense that Jesus did exist or it didn't exist? Let's look at these claims. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 6 says, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at once. Most of them are still alive to this day, though some have died. Now, we're going to argue from 2 different points. Let's go with point number 1. Let's say all of these people are lying. None of these people really saw God. They were all just hallucinating, right? The 500 people that attested to say that they seen God all at the same time. Since we like facts, let's get into the facts. There is no such thing as a mass hallucination. There's no such thing to where I'm hallucinating, you're hallucinating, and we're seeing the same thing. Because hallucination is like a dream. That's like everybody having the same exact dream. It's not possible. That's scientifically impossible. So if that's true, then there has to be a miracle that over 500 people had a hallucination that they seen Jesus and they were wrong. Well, if these people are lying, and they're reporting these things and they're hearing it and they're testifying, saying that they've seen these things, they're eyewitnesses, and then it bleeds over to Tacitus and Josephus, then we would have to say, okay, well then why would they lie? What will be the reasoning for lying? If I'm lying, I'm going to lie for some type of gain. I'm going to lie for money, fame, power, respect. I'm going to lie for something, right? Everybody that said they seen Jesus die and they seen him rise again, they didn't do anything but lose everything they had, including their lives. If I'm going to say a lie of saying that I seen the Son of God, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to make up a lie that's going to benefit me and help me gain something. No one's willing to die for a lie, but everyone is always willing to die for what they think is the truth. So if they think that's the truth and they was willing to lose everything and be persecuted and imprisoned, you would have to question, well, why would they die for a lie? That doesn't make sense. So that argument doesn't stand. Atheists, there is atheists that study to look for this stuff, and they even believe that Jesus existed. So for him to even say that Jesus didn't exist is just straight blasphemous from even people that even went down the route that he went down, to where they needed the evidence and they went after to seek all of this information. So for him to say Jesus didn't exist, then that just lets you know how much evidence he's actually doing or not doing.
What puts Christianity above Buddhism or Muslims? Like, what put Christianity above any of it? Because they all operate, not Buddhism, but Muslims and Hindus, everybody operating off of a faith belief.
So we'll put Christianity above a lot of other religions is historical facts, right? So Christianity is supposed to be testable, and a way many other religions aren't. So if the resurrection didn't happen, then Christianity doesn't exist. Churches and things started in Acts, which happened after the crucifixion and the resurrection. So yes, it's not blind faith that we're believing on. It's actual historical facts and things that were proven to have happened over the course of so many years. So yeah, it's not blind faith.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John did not write Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No, those were names ascribed to those books later. But we don't know that because we just open the book and be like, oh, it's the truth. This is the literal truth of God. We don't know that. You see what I'm saying? And they weren't written in that order. Mark was written first. Matthew and Luke just copied off Mark 80 to 90%. You copying this cat 80 to 90%, and you just one up in him because you're gonna make the story a little bit better.
So the claim that they didn't write those books, I would 100% disagree with that. Yes, the Bible does say the gospel according to Matthew, according to Luke, according to John, all of these things. So even though that there wasn't titles attached to these names when they were written, doesn't mean that the author was still acknowledged, right? So it was very common for writings and manuscripts to kind of go around without an actual title, but the name and the person accredited to the actual book and the actual title was already there. It's just like, kind of like everyone knew who wrote it, and then when they finally formed the book and they finally formed the Bible and all of these different manuscripts and put them together, then that's when they were putting these titles and names together. But who wrote these books and the names attached to them was already there from the foundation when it was created. There's no other ancient tradition that's claiming otherwise. So it doesn't make sense. So even going to the conversation about him saying that they copied each other 80 to 90%, there are so many different things within the story because they have shared experiences and shared events. So if me and you go through the same type of things, yeah, we're gonna have similarities, but even the way Matthew and Luke would look at Mark and some of the things that they said about Mark in some regard was very different than how Mark viewed himself. So if they were doing carbon copies and they were trying to form this legend to elevate the story, Matthew and Luke left parts into the story that was embarrassing or made them look bad. So if you're leaving stuff in that make you look bad when you're just trying to take the story and make it a little bit better, I'm going to say the same story you said and I'm going to elevate it times 10 or make it just a tad bit better to make this legend seem 100% complete and whole. But there was embarrassing things and things that didn't make them look so great that they kept in the story. So how did they copy each other? And they're copying off each other to make this better story. But then you have different personal perspectives and different things that made us look good, made us look bad. And I didn't look at you in the same light that you viewed yourself. So that wouldn't make sense. Yeah. So the rest of that video, he was just kind of regurgitating some of the information that he said, previously. And, I really feel bad because, in this video, he was saying a lot of things about how he wasn't able to ask questions And I don't know if I put that into this video or if I just kind of skipped to certain parts, because I didn't want this video to be too long, but I want it to be informational. We're going to do way more videos and covering specific topics. So yeah. But, you know, he said a lot of things about him not being able to ask questions. And I think him not being able to ask questions from an early age led him to form his own opinion about some of the things that he's seen in the Bible. So he was kind of performing and acting on his own rhetoric instead of having wise counsel around him to tell him, hey, if this is the type of evidence you need, or if this is the type of things you have questions about, this is the type of evidence that you're going to get based off of this historical event. You know, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I love doing stuff like this. It gets my brain thinking to learn different things about the Bible to even help strengthen my faith. I just wish that, and I pray that this brother, you know, gets to the point to where God can, you know, show him and give him his own personal experiences, and however that might be. You know, God knows his heart. God has a plan for him and has a story for him. But I hope you guys learned some things from this video. If you have any more questions, or if there's some things that I missed and you want to go ahead and put that in the comment section, go ahead and do that now. That would be very much appreciated. I will meet you guys in the comment section and we will go from there. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, if you made it all the way to this end. I got other videos. I think I had one over here that I debunked some things about slavery over there somewhere. You guys will see it, but I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.
If it don't match scripture, we gon' bring it up. Hit subscribe one time. This is